back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat and I am your host. And this week we are talking all about the father wound and the nervous system with my new friend, Laura Lisa Larios, who I actually discovered on a Instagram live with someone I did a live with. And I was so intrigued by her work, her combination of using healing the father wound with the nervous system. I've said this time and time again, but I think the biggest generational cycle that our millennial generation is breaking is one of emotional regulation. So I just thought this was a great conversation to have. And also, I haven't had somebody come on the podcast to talk specifically about the father wound. I had a podcast episode, a solo one that I did early on when I started the podcast, and it's called From Father Wound to Freedom. And it's one about me talking about my relationship to my father, understanding his generational trauma, how it affected me. And that was from the lens of 2 years ago. I've grown so much since then. And I talk a little bit about just the new ways that I'm incorporating healing the father wound in my life through this conversation with Laura. We talk about religion and how that impacted our relationship with our fathers. We also talk about what it means to have a dysfunctional relationship with a physically present father who's emotionally unavailable. We also talk about what it's like to have a physically and emotionally unavailable father as well. So we talk about all the different dynamics. It's a great episode you're going to want to make notes on, listen to, and also there's a part in the episode towards the end where Laura gives you some reflection questions to think on. You may want to pause, be in a space where you can kind of mentally or emotionally move through them, or you may want to write them down and journal on them later. There's a lot of great tools in this episode and a lot of vulnerable shares. So as always with every episode, open mind, open heart. And also thank you so much for being here. Thank you guys for rating the podcast, subscribing, reviewing it. I see all the reviews. I see all the follows. I am so grateful for your guys' support as we keep on with this podcast, with this channel. The only way that this podcast can continue to grow and meet people where they are in their journeys is when you subscribe, rate, review, and share it. So please don't stop doing that because it means the world. And don't forget that every week when you subscribe, rate, or review the podcast, you can review it and screenshot that review and send it to me on Instagram. I give away a free ancestral intuitive reading on the last day of each and every month. I announce the winner on Instagram every time that we have a new winner. So if that sounds like something you might like, it's a 35-minute experience where I tap into the energy of your ancestral lineage. We do some mediumship. We talk about how the ancestral wounds are showing up in your life and how to move forward with healing. So that sounds good. Subscribe, rate, and review, and share with me on Instagram so I know where to find you if you win. All right, guys, enjoy the episode. This is Laura Lisa Larios on the Heal with Kat podcast. Laura, welcome to the Heal with Kat podcast. I am so excited to have you here today, and I am so excited to pick your brain on your wisdom and the knowledge that you are going to share with me in the community.
Thank you so much for having me, Kat.
Yeah, of course. I would love to dive right in and understand your story, what brought you to this work, and even just what intrigues you so much about the father wound.
Yes. So my journey into working with the father wound is really deeply personal. So I'll kind of take your listeners back a moment to my own father, who was a brilliant man. He was an archaeologist who traveled the world and had several advanced degrees. He was full of knowledge and curiosity and incredible stories. But beneath his brilliance, there was a lot of deep wounds of shame that he carried throughout his life. And these wounds often manifested as excessive drinking. And when he drank, his behavior turned verbally and physically abusive towards my sisters and me. I had two sisters. I was the middle child. So growing up, my nervous system was in a constant state of hypervigilance, really just fearing his presence and the unpredictable shifts in his mood. I remember vividly, like sort of walking on eggshells around him and really trying to avoid triggering any of his criticism or anger. He was very incredibly critical, which made my nervous system very afraid to make mistakes. And my sisters and I were also homeschooled by him because he was a professor and he pulled us out of traditional schooling. And I think I was in kindergarten. and he decided that he wanted to homeschool us. So, which meant we didn't get much of a reprieve from his controlling and abusive behavior. So, um, there was no escape. There was no safe haven for my nervous system, for my sister's nervous systems to find rest or regulation. And I'm painting this picture a little bit. I know this is kind of like probably challenging for some of maybe your listeners to listen to at this very moment. And if you are getting triggered by anything that I'm sharing right now, just giving yourself just a lot of space and compassion, especially if you resonate with any piece of this story that I'm sharing right now. But this environment, like I said, really shaped me in profound ways. It really installed in me a deep need for control and a sense of hyper independence. And I really learned to rely only on myself because trust and safety were things I didn't associate with others. And so my nervous system became wired for survival. And I carried that survival energy into every aspect of my life, pretty much. And as I grew older, I became obsessed with trying to understand my father and the forces that shaped his behavior. And so that actually led to, it's a whole nother maybe discussion for another time, but I pursued the study of criminal psychology, searching for answers and why someone with so much brilliance would potentially turn their pain outward in such destructive ways. And so I wanted to find meaning in my own experiences. And what I learned through that process was a lot of intellectual learning, which was great. Help my nervous system provide a little bit of context as like, oh, he had trauma and oh, he was carrying shame and like all of these different pieces, right? But again, I wanted to find ways I could prevent like a similar experience or harm, also, and of course, heal parts of myself. And so as my as I continued to kind of study, I ended up leaving the forensic psychology program and ended up finding the nervous system work many, many years later. And that was really the deep personal healing work that I needed. And also, as I was unpacking and processing my own grief and, just rewiring my own nervous system around these experiences from when I was growing up, I also deepened my relationship with God. And that was that's a whole nother story, another podcast. But that whole experience really just helped me to really see that I learned that the father wound is not just an individual experience, it's a nervous system and inheritance and often a spiritual wound as well that leaves us disconnected from safety and trust and even from God as our loving father. And by working with the nervous system somatically and processing trauma and leading into the love and guidance of God as my father, I was able to break these cycles and create living in a more grounded, safe place within my own system and create a lot of freedom. And then that is what then like really just propelled me because that really deep personal experience I had with it and so many other women that I had met in my career and also just in my community that had similar stories, maybe not exactly the same in terms of the level of abuse, but there was still this like disconnect from their fathers and how that shaped their nervous systems. So that's just, yeah, a little bit about what really brought me to focusing in on the father wound.
This is why I wanted to have you on the podcast because when I heard you share your story on that live with Priscilla, I just was like, had full body chills, and I have full body chills listening to you vulnerably share your experience with your father. So thank you for doing that. And the father is a very interesting role that they carry. The fathers carry a very interesting role in the family system. In family constellation therapy, we say that the father carries the role of allowing children to feel joy, to feel that they have direction in their life, that they're safe to move forward and take action with things. And when that is abused emotionally, physically, even we can call out sexually as well, as a safe place to kind of share this stuff on the podcast. This community can hold information like that. It manipulates our safety. And we, of course, like you said, we go into the survival mode. And then what I find so interesting, the ancestral through line for that is that we look at ancestral trauma and the survival energy that repeats over and over again in the family system. And so when father is displaying these survival mechanisms, then it makes me curious about, was there war trauma behind? Like in my family system, there's war trauma for survival. It shaped the nervous system to be wired a certain way. And then emotional regulation was not tangible or available. And so then it created another ripple effect. So I just think it's really interesting how you've tied the nervous system into the father wound and through your experience. So, as a trauma expert, what is the father wound? Like, what does it mean and how does it show up in people's lives? Because I can imagine people would be listening to this. And if they're not familiar with the father wound, they might be like, oh, some of that sounds really familiar. Or some people might say, I didn't experience that at all, but I know that I don't have a good relationship with my dad. So, like, how can people understand the father wound for themselves a little bit more?
Yeah, I love this question. So, how I define the father wound is this deep imprint left by unmet needs for safety, for love, for guidance. And so it's the gap between what we instinctively craved and what we actually received. And this wound isn't just emotional, like we've been talking about. It impacts our nervous system and it shapes how we relate to the world, to the external, right? To ourselves and also others. And it teaches us often subconsciously who we need to be to survive and what parts of ourself we must abandon to feel acceptable. So in my own life, the father wound, for example, instilled a belief that I had to provide for myself completely, emotionally and materially, because reliance on anyone else felt unsafe. So if I could create a life that couldn't be taken from me, my nervous system reasoned that I wouldn't have to feel the shame of being a burden. And this is a common thread for many people, but also I see this a lot with women. I mean, men too have father wounds, and the drive to cultivate things that feel unaccessible, like meaning like money, success, and self-sufficiency, because the presence of a father who was critical or controlling or even absent, maybe you just had a father that wasn't around very much, taught us that dependence, taught our nervous system that dependence is dangerous. So this belief in our system often shows up as hyperindependence, the relentless pursuit of self-reliance. Again, so we're never vulnerable to rejection or disappointment or abandonment. Again, it can manifest as perfectionism or an intense need for control or a fear of asking for help. And while these patterns may help us feel safe temporarily, they also isolate us from connection and support that our nervous systems truly need in order to heal and thrive.
What I love that you just touched on is the theme of abandonment and how it shows up. There's like two sides of the same coin for it. So sometimes you had a controlling father and that causes
Yeah,
you to act a certain way, but then sometimes you have an absent father and it
yeah,
causes you to go into the same theme. Can you touch on that a little bit more? Because I think when it comes to like healing family trauma, people think that there's only like one narrow way that things happen. And when they come to
uh-huh.
me, I'm like, yes, you heard this on a podcast, but also this is your family. This isn't, it's not going to show up the same way every single time. Like we have to look at the nuances of things at times.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. There's a lot of nuance. So when we've experienced some form of abandonment from our father, so whether that was abandonment from receiving his love in some form, right, or safety. Again, our systems are wired for safety. It's always looking for that. In order for us to have a secure attachment, um, and have a regulated secure attachment is what leads us to have a regulated nervous system. Is like, stress can happen, we can get triggered, but we're able to come back to a place of safety in our system and presence and connection, right? But for people that grew up in households or had fathers, for example, or parental father figures that were either emotionally absent, like they were physically in the home but they were not like, really speaking with you or asking about your day. They weren't emotionally available in any way. Maybe they were physically there, but they weren't really attuned to you or asking how you were doing. So again, there's not really like secure attachment being built between you and your father. And so there's like the system's picking up on these cues, then even if he's physically present, that I'm not important or I'm not safe, essentially, because there's a lack of connection here. And then, of course, if there's any type of criticism or like, from your father, parental figure, father figure that was harsh or judgmental, that's also going to cue that we're not safe. And um, so it's also going to cue like needing to it's going to trigger these protector parts, and that's a whole other conversation we can go into. But essentially, these different parts of us can start to develop, like the achiever or the perfectionist or the controller, as a way to try to keep us safe from experiencing that shame again that we feel when we heard maybe that criticism from our father. So again, it's lack of safety, it's lack of that emotional attunement from our fathers. And again, oftentimes because generationally, our fathers didn't experience this either. And oftentimes they're repeating the same nervous system patterns and cycles that they experienced growing up. And so that is what leads to this abandonment wound of not being met. We have unmet needs, whether those are emotional needs, physical needs. Usually it's a combination of sometimes both, but sometimes for a lot of clients I serve, it's more emotional. Like physically, they were very well cared for. Their fathers sometimes even showed up to their sports games, right? Like they say, my father was there. But then when we go a little bit deeper, we find that their father, yes, was physically there, but emotionally not very present and never really, was that involved in their lives in some ways emotionally.
And even to expand on that, I work a lot with women and we work a lot on the mother wound. And a lot of times when we're doing family constellation, I will put in the role of the father on the papers to support the child because sometimes when mom has an emotional
Mm,
breakdown or she's emotionally unavailable herself, or there's a lot
yeah.
of like parentified child roles happening with mom, then sometimes dad emotionally doesn't come in and provide the support that the child needs. So
Yes.
oftentimes I'll put even if we're focusing on the maternal line, I will put in a masculine figure in the
Mhm.
field to make sure that the client, the child has that stability and the safety to
Mhm.
move forward, that there's like balance between the two. And it kind of got me thinking on that as well as sometimes we come into working on our families and we think, well, my mom is the problem.
Yeah.
But actually it's, well, maybe the focus is your mom, but also where was your dad?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Kat, I love that you shared this because absolutely. And it's interesting because I have clients I've worked with as well that will talk about I have great relationship with my father. It was my mom who was the one who was critical or the one that was kind of up and down emotionally. And it was hard. I was like walking on eggshells around her, but dad was like the constant in the home. And yeah, you go just a little bit deeper though, and we find that yeah, dad was there, but he wasn't really stepping in. Like let's say mom was being critical and maybe dad was just kind of there in the background, or he was at home, maybe he was at work at that moment or whatever. And so there still wasn't that element of our system picking up on safety or protection from our fathers. And that's really what they represent and bringing up that consistency of being that safety for us. I mean, our mothers are supposed to represent that safety too, but it's in a different way that the mothers give the safety versus the father. And so, yeah, absolutely, I love that you shared that because we can have these. It's funny too because as we can even idolize our relationship with our father is like because he was seems so opposite of our mother and we're not even realizing that. And I'm not saying it's always the case, but like oftentimes when I have clients coming to see me, though, there's some element there where they felt like dad didn't stand up for them, or dad didn't say anything, or dad just, yeah, just wasn't like physically present or emotionally present in some way.
Or even made it about himself.
Or that too. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I spent 10 years working on the father wound. I spent
Mhm.
10 years in different modalities working on my father's family. And I just had my friend who does my FCT. She's like, Kat, you've done it all. You need to stop. You need to find something else to work on. And I was like, but there's so much. And I think that it's like this grief that I went through of grieving the father wound. And then when I
Yeah.
started going into the mother wound, realizing, oh shit, did I have two dysfunctional parents? And then the freak out. And then as soon as I started going into the mother wound, I was like, oh wait, I need a parent. And so I went to and so it's just like this constant like, who do I go to and where do I turn and where am I getting this safety and do I even have safe relationships with my parents? And if I don't,
Yeah.
then what is my response to that? And that's I think part of just emotional maturity is like really being able to see things for what they are, process your emotions in a really safe and held way, and then you get to create boundaries in your life of what kind of relationships you want to have. And then, where like I said, where's your energy going and what is best served for you? And that was my journey is, okay, here's what this relationship looks like here. Here's what this relationship looks like here,
Yeah.
but how am I taking care of myself because I can't control them anymore?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with me, Kat. Like it's quite a journey, right? When you start to unravel these different pieces and these different layers. And one piece that I love that you just spoke to was like how, our nervous systems are so intelligent, how God designed us. It's remarkable in the sense that our nervous systems will never show us something until it's ready to be seen. And so, like I said, there's some oftentimes these layers, like just when we think like, oh, okay, that's like completed, we find sometimes there's like another layer or something underneath that. And it's not to make it sound like, oh, we're always just doing this work, right? And it gets like, exhausting. It's like, no, it can be liberating. There's a lot of freedom and joy and peace that's experienced in this process. And again, at the same time, like the more stabilized our system becomes, the more capacity we start to have for these different ways that we were not met, the way in the sense that being able to actually see and feel maybe what wasn't completed at that time, there was no resolution for in our system, and we start to get some resolution, right? Then sometimes another layer will show up because more and more things are, getting resolved. And so I just think it's so beautiful that you have been on this 10-year journey of unraveling these different pieces that your system has been trying to find resolution around. I can relate a lot to what you're sharing. And I will say one other piece here for me, just personally speaking, and everyone has a different journey in their life with spirituality. But, for me, having God as my father, really learning how to be a daughter. I didn't know how to be a daughter. I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
And even though God, like we don't usually think of God as like this, obviously this physical person. And sometimes there is a little bit of a transition for our system because initially I had to, like you said, have another, in my own healing, like have other uh, masculine figures in my life physically so that my system could have examples and blueprints of what it was like to be held by the masculine in a safe way and be met in ways I had never been met. And then once I had just a little bit of that blueprint, I was then able to like really fully surrender to God. And then he really showed me like what love was and like how to like come to him whenever I was upset and how he was going to provide for me and that there was no shame, there was no condemnation. And I think it's still a process my system is learning with him, and I welcome it, but I'm just love that like how I've just softened to the point where now I'm like I want to be your daughter. I want to know what that's like to be a daughter and to be provided for.
I've never thought about it that way before. Because the focus is always he didn't know how to be a dad, but maybe also like I don't even know how to be a daughter and like how that affects as well. And I almost feel like as you're talking, I can feel this question rising up inside of me, which is at what point with the father wound are we expecting perfectionism
Mm,
to kind of like override our experience? And how do you navigate perfectionism when it comes to maybe women and men looking at the father wound? Because I think, I really do believe our parents do the best they can with the tools they have. Not any parent is going to be perfect.
yeah,
You can do all the work, you can read all the books, you're still going to make mistakes. And so what is the
yeah.
fine line between understanding and perfectionism when it comes to the father wound?
Well, first of all, I love that you brought this up because sometimes I have clients that are becoming parents, and with all this like more people talking about these topics online, particularly social media. And sometimes then what I see is like these, whether it's a mother or a father, getting a little bit worried, like, oh, I don't want to mess this up, right? Like that perfectionism of like, I don't want to be like my dad and I don't want to be like my mom. And I really want to make sure my child feels met in all these ways that I wasn't met. And so sometimes there can be almost like a level of anxiety underneath it. And the one thing I always try to remind them and their nervous systems is like, it's not that there was ever, the issue is that there was a rupture. The issue is, was there repair? So is there repair?
Thank you for
So
saying that. I love that so much.
yeah, so that's the missing piece. So it's like so many of us are like running around and making sure we never have a rupture. Well, that's impossible. It's just not attainable. So just right there, take that pressure off yourself of never having a rupture ever again. Like it's just like it's not attainable. And really is it's the repair piece. So for example, like in my story and then with a lot of my clients too, that's the piece that was missing. Like there would be something would happen, like maybe the parent got really critical and mad at you and shamed you for something, but there was never any acknowledgement of the tone of voice or the way they spoke to you. Maybe they were having a bad day, but there was never any communication or like, hey, can I let's reconnect here. It was just, okay, move on. And we never got that repair. So that's where I tell, yeah, like individuals now who are maybe becoming parents themselves as one example, that you now are learning skills because your system is, getting this regulation. You're learning what it's like to have more capacity in your system to hold all kinds of emotions. And so having that emotional regulation, that's a big piece to being a parent. And I think a lot of our parents just didn't know what that was, or again, they were mirroring what they had experienced from their parents. And of course, also we come from generations where we're kind of the first second generation that has experienced the most abundance of any other generation. So you have to imagine technology and all the things, right? Like go back a couple more generations and there was, like you said, wars and poverty and just a lot of struggle and survival. And so that's a whole other topic. But essentially, yeah, there wasn't this element of having that emotional regulation or even knowing what that was. And now there's just more awareness and more people working on that emotional regulation. And that emotional regulation is what then creates the ability to repair with people in our lives, whether that's our children, whether that's in our marriages, whether that's in our jobs with our colleagues or a boss. Like that resolution piece is huge for our system.
Especially when you have a pattern of taking things personally. I find that for
Yes.
me, I am extremely sensitive. I
Yes.
take everything personally. Like I have to really, really work on just because this person can't tell you it's not about you doesn't mean it's about you. It just is about like they can't, you just gotta stop taking it personally, Kat. Just walk away. It's okay. But it's really hard when you don't get that safety of like, oh, this has nothing to
Yeah.
do with me. They're just having their own day. And as the
Right.
oldest daughter of 5 kids and very parentified, I was
Yeah.
very enmeshed in I have to make everything better. Everything is my
Mhm.
fault. I have to do everything perfect. If I don't, I'm a failure. Kind of that
Yeah.
like performance anxiety. Um, Okay, that's I just love that. I love that perspective on perfectionism. And I think also what I've learned is on the other side of perfectionism, or rather I should say that perfectionism is a really pretty mask for shame.
Oh yeah. 100%.
And
It's a
so if you
protector
can
part.
exactly, and so if you can look into things that you think that make you a bad person, right? You might be mirroring that into the lineage. Well, maybe other people feel that same theme as well, and the way that they act on it is really just what keeps the cycle going. We've kind of talked about this, but I just want to ask it again because I think that there might be some more like bullet pointed topics that you could bring up. But what are common themes or patterns that you notice in those with an unhealed father wound?
So one of the most prevalent themes is hypervigilance.
Ooh, whew.
So it's a state of constant alertness and scanning for potential danger, rejection, or criticism. And it's interesting because oftentimes when we first even hear that word hypervigilance, it can sound almost like you're outwardly very anxious. And while, yes, sometimes that does present that way, oftentimes I find with a lot of my clients who have an unhealed father wound, and this goes for men too, externally they look very calm, they look very collected, but internally there's all this hypervigilance going on all the time. They're overthinking everything. Like you said, there's perfectionism, there's these protector parts, right, that are coming online, they're the achiever. And so again, this hypervigilance often stems from an environment where love or approval felt conditional or unpredictable. So our systems, our nervous systems need predictability, right? Especially when we're growing up and our nervous systems are being shaped and formed in the environment that we're living in. If one moment like we're getting some love and maybe a little bit of acceptance, but the next minute it feels like it's being taken away, then the system can't trust, right? So it's already getting this pattern of this is a threat because there isn't something consistent here. I can't rely on this. And so again, the nervous system learns to stay on high alert essentially to avoid emotional or physical harm, which can make it difficult then to relax or fully trust others, even themselves. They don't trust themselves. And so this hypervigilance frequently gives rise to also hyper independence, where the belief is if I rely solely on myself, I won't be let down. And while this mindset may appear as strength or resilience, it's often masked as a deep fear of vulnerability and a struggle to depend on others. And it creates barriers to intimacy and trust, leaving individuals feeling isolated, even when surrounded by lots of people. I often find these are individuals that feel very alone And it's because our system, again, is protecting them from that ability to really connect, because there's no blueprint really for connection. And also, even when they did connect, they felt like they were then let down, or there was some type of maybe shame or criticism that was met. So again, there's the system's not equating vulnerability with safety.
That explains a lot. That explains a lot. What about cultural or societal factors that contribute to the father wound? Because I know, in like Middle Eastern cultures, there is a pattern of putting men on a pedestal that sometimes it can be said without being said that women are maybe in a different position than men, or even just generationally, like different generations have different impacts. So what are your thoughts on that? Hey everyone, it's Kat from the podcast with a little break in today's episode to share with you a really exciting offering I have called the Age Mapping 3-Day Mini Course. In just 3 days, we'll uncover the stories hidden in your family's past. By mapping the ages of key moments of trauma within your lineage, you'll begin to see how those moments could still be influencing your life today at those same ages. On day 1, you'll experience my powerful ancestral subconscious meditation. On day 2, we'll dive into the age mapping exercise. And lastly, on day 3, you'll geek out with me on the topic of epigenetics, which can explain the way that trauma is passed down generation after generation. The entire workshop is only $35. Are you ready to dive into your ancestral stories and heal for good? Go to catdow.com/agemap or visit the link in the show notes below. Your transformation starts with understanding your past right now.
Zooming out, so regardless of what, absolutely there are cultural factors and societal factors, even generational factors, I know we've touched on a little bit, but just zooming out just from a nervous system high level, regardless of what culture we're in or where we live in the world, our systems are all designed the same, meaning they need safety. And one of the ways we get safety is through these, what's called the 3 C's. So that is connection, context, and choice. So oftentimes, regardless of where you live culturally, if your system experienced an environment where you didn't have very much choice, or the system felt like there was very little choice, that there was no context for what was happening, or again, there was a lot of rupture in connection, automatically that is going to pattern a system for more survival than it is for living in regulation, meaning connected to safety. So just like kind of like just from a really like broad, like physiological aspect of what our systems need in order to get regulation, it's through a big piece, especially when we're really little. We may not have the context piece because our brain isn't developed enough for the like understanding like rational context for things, but it's connection, And so again, if we are in a culture where, and I've seen this because I work with people from around the world, and it's always really interesting to work with people like in Germany, and then work with someone in Australia, and then work with, someone who lives in South America, and still see similar themes playing out in their system, even though culturally there are differences. And I often find it's because of this piece around the lack of repair, lack of, resolution for the system, and this piece around, lack of connection with their fathers.
We've been talking a lot about what happens when people are in these dysfunctional or disorganized relationships with their fathers. But let's just say that somebody's listening and they have no father figure present. How do these things still apply? Like where do they identify with the father wound story?
Well, first of all, our systems are always going to gravitate towards looking for a father, looking for some type of a guidance or a place of safety and stability. And so even if you didn't grow up particularly with a father in your system is still going to be searching for that on some level, like looking for that masculine protector, energy in your life. So maybe it wasn't with a biological parent, maybe it was then transferred to an uncle, or maybe to a teacher, or maybe to another friend's parent, right? But again, our system is still going to always be looking for that. And because the way also I feel that God designed our systems too is to have both the father and the mother, to have both of those energies, to really have our system to be wired to have that full regulation from both parents. Now, granted, that's not always possible due to different family situations and things, but even if it wasn't there, your system is still going to be seeking it in some way. And I always say to individuals who didn't have that, they often tell me like, oh, I had a school teacher that I know I would spend a lot of time with after school, or like really would, spend extra time with me, and was really like, very giving in their time and their energy, and was very patient. And like, that was a blueprint for their system around the father, and having someone really look after them and mentor them, and show them what it was like to take risks, and step out into the world, but like know that they're still loved and cared for.
It's big. Yeah, because I can feel like just coming up within me is like I can hear people listening and being like, well, I didn't even know my dad. So what do I even do with
Yeah.
that? You know,
Yeah.
and it is interesting how that manifests in people's lives is that searching for the father. I know that
Uh-huh.
I did that a lot growing up with the mother wound unconsciously. I was searching for a female figure or,
Uh-huh.
like I have a really dear friend of mine, Julie, and I sometimes I have to be careful of my own boundaries in our friendship because I kind of look at her like a mom figure, and it's like, well, she's not my
Mhm.
mom. I have a mom, and I have to be, like so. There's these like back and forths that we go through trying to like get these needs met, like you said,
Yeah.
and also I'm sure that people are listening to this and thinking, oh, I wonder if it comes up in my romantic relationships. It's like it's probably the first place that it's coming
For
up.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. The first place to look usually is our romantic relationships as well for some of that. And I love that you shared that, Kat, too. Like, for anyone listening right now who's like, who didn't grow, maybe they didn't even have that teacher, maybe you didn't even have that, other person like, really in your life, because there were other men around you maybe, but they didn't exhibit that quality of being a loving, nurturing, but yet very strong, stable figure. So your system still doesn't really know, like, maybe didn't have a full blueprint for that. And I will say, even for me growing up, because I was homeschooled, I didn't have the teacher. I just had my dad. I did have my grandfather. He was one person I think that did help my system to have a little bit of that blueprint. Um, and then the other piece then was, again, for me personally in my journey, was God. Like, having him was another way for my system to get that blueprint of a nurturing, loving father. And even though I grew up Catholic, and that's a whole other probably discussion for another day, but like, initially my system had a lot of resistance to God because of my religious upbringing and the shame in the Catholic Church that I experienced. It was very similar to the shame I experienced with my father. So I resisted God for a long time, and what, I believed, but I didn't really, think that he was someone that I could go to. I was like, no, I'm going to take care of this myself. I got it. And if anything was going wrong in my life, I was always trying to solve it, always. And finally, I again, through the process of healing my system and doing some of this work, I was able to open my heart a little bit more and really be able to let him in, and in gradual ways, and so that I could see that he was not someone that this presence that was going to like shame me or condemn me the way that my system had initially associated with some of my upbringing in the church.
Well, I was raised in a very Roman Catholic church family.
Yeah.
And I can totally relate to the shame. And I have said this so many times on this podcast and in my newsletter and just everything. I did not vibe with Jesus for the longest time. It literally took me until like 3 years, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I did not like anything about the masculine in the church.
Mhm.
Priests made me uncomfortable. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't trust anyone. Like, and it's
Yeah.
something I kept private for a very long time because I had this good girl syndrome where if I did everything I thought I was supposed to do, then I would be accepted and I would be loved. And it's interesting because my family's still very Catholic. They still have very
Oh,
Catholic beliefs. And I've been pretty open about what I do in terms of like, I can speak to people that have crossed over and I'm an intuitive and I also work within this God energy field. And there's kind of this like confusion, like I've left the church. And what's
mhm.
ironic is that I've never been closer to Jesus. I've never been closer to God. I've never been more spiritually faithful in my life, but it just doesn't look like the
Yeah.
Catholic box that I was like raised in. And I feel that I'm almost hearing that from you too. Like this feeling of once I was able to explore the masculine and explore God in my own way that was in alignment with my own life and my own soul and my own desires, that then there was this reclamation with the masculine and with the father energy.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Kat. You definitely, being raised, in a Catholic church. My father was Catholic, and we would go to church every Sunday. So yeah, I definitely know what you mean in terms of my own system too, being intimidated by priests. And I remember going to confession and just being terrified that I would say the wrong thing. And,
Yeah.
you know, just so many things like as a little child, like I didn't understand. And it was such a big religion. There was just so much I didn't understand because I was so little and no one was really explaining anything to me. So my little nervous system was just doing the best it could to try to, you know, make sense of it all. And, yeah, it's really interesting, like unpacking these different layers. And one thing I'll share too about this, that God is, like you said, Jesus particularly. I didn't have a close relationship either with Jesus. Growing up, I mean, I remember praying as a child. I remember going to church, and I believed. And actually, it was interesting. One story though that I come, and I love how good God is, and how He brings us back to things like 30 years later, even because I remember as a child I loved the story, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Like I would read that book over and over. It was by C.S. Lewis. And that to me made sense to my system. Like there was something in it that I really gravitated towards. And it wasn't until I was older, of course, understanding the symbolism of Aslan, the lion in that story, and him representing Jesus, and why I loved that lion so much. And it was, anyway, it was just like a really full circle moment of God, like showing up as the lion in my life. And that was where it felt safe for me at the time when I was a child, because Aslan was this, you know, comforting, very strong, protective, masculine figure that sacrificed his life, you know, for one of the boys in the story. But really, he's representing Jesus, and he rises from the dead, and it just, yeah, like so many layers to that. But I love how God, you know, continually, you know, comes to meet us where we're at.
I didn't even know that about that story at all. So now I want to go and watch it so I can look at it from that perspective and take some notes or something. I just love the
Oh yeah, there's so
symbolism.
many layers. Yeah, so many symbolisms in that. Oh, C.S. Lewis in general, like his books are incredible, and he was, you know, a Christian, and so just how he writes about, you know, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and again, a lot of this stuff I couldn't really even, my system wasn't even fully ready to dive into. And when I say ready, I mean I was intellectually I was really good at reading books and understanding things, but like really letting things into my heart, like that God's really been working on my heart. So yeah, I love that you're maybe thinking about going to visit some of the revisit maybe C.S. Lewis's works.
Yeah, I love reading. I'm like a big reader. I've always got a fiction book on hand that I'm like moving through. So maybe I'll read the book and then
Yeah.
I'll watch the movie. And I guess, it kind of just, as we're talking about this, it just makes me think about this work in family constellation therapy that I do. I think you would love it because we call the morphogenic field the God field, the quantum field. It's all truth, all loving. People find so much freedom being in the energy field on the papers because it's just, you're in this energy of like so much love and consistency, which is and truth, which is beautiful. But many times when we call in people's ancestors, I tell people behind your right shoulder, create a little bit of space and then see your dad. And in that space, sometimes people like the space just to have. And sometimes people are like, oh, my dad's a little close. And so I'll say, call in Jesus, call in
Yeah.
Archangel Michael, call in whoever you work with, call in a male guide who you can work with, who can act as a protector for you. And I love that you've been able to find that masculine protection in God because it's source. It's the highest you can go. It is the the alpha and the omega, like the creation, the source of everything. So I think that's really
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Kat. Yes, I love that.
So, taking it back to some of the specifics of the father wound, if someone's listening to this and they're like, well, I probably have a father wound, but I don't really know how to move forward from here, like, what are the
Yeah.
steps that someone can take to rather than know, because I love that you said that, but embody the healing of the father wound? Because I love that you said that. Like, we can all listen to these podcasts, we can read these books, we can take in all this information, we can talk to ChatGPT, like, we can do all the things, but it means so little compared to the impact of embodying a healed father wound.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for those of you who maybe are on that path right now that are still maybe taking this in from an intellectual perspective, you know, that makes sense too. Initially, that was where I started. So I understand that piece. Um, and like at the same time, like we've been sharing that that's only the first kind of step in the process. And um, the next step is really getting to more of the emotional aspects and the nervous system patterns, which have to be done through a somatic, through a body experience. Because when we're little, we're not intellectualizing any of this. It's all sensory. So it's all through our body. So one of the first things I would say is recognizing and beginning, in terms of beginning to heal the father wound, um, is again, it's about moving from survival driven responses like that hypervigilance that we talked about and hyper independence, or maybe it's shut down, into a place of safety, connection, and freedom and presence. And so this work often is a combination of, like I mentioned, awareness, compassion, somatic work, with usually with another practitioner or individual, because we all have our blind spots and we need to, oftentimes be guided in this process. And I would also say that the first step is also identifying how the father wound shows up maybe in your behaviors, beliefs, and nervous system responses. So I'm just going to throw out a few questions here for listeners just to begin to reflect on. So, number one is, do I struggle to relax even when everything seems fine? So, whether that's mentally relaxed, like I can sit on the couch or lay on my bed and my mind is not like going a mile a minute, or I'm not thinking about all the things I need to be doing. Like, for example, do you find yourself unable to enjoy vacations or downtime without thinking about what could go wrong? Do you avoid asking for help because maybe you believe it's a sign of weakness or fear you'll be let down? Do you equate self-worth with being able to handle everything on your own, emotionally, financially, or otherwise? And do I strive for perfection in my work? So does like appearances or relationships, like do I believe that anything, like do I show that perfectionism in my relationships, believing that anything less will result in rejection or criticism? And then do I feel when I meet a goal or an how do you feel when you meet a goal or an expectation? Do you spiral into self-criticism or fear of being judged? So these are just some of the things to begin to ask yourself. If you're saying yes to some of these things, like maybe that's indicating that yes, you have maybe an unhealed father wound, that, again, maybe your system is needing some of that restoration, because really it's a restorative process. It needs resolution around some of these things. And the beautiful thing too about this work, I just also want to share with your listeners, is that your system's going to go at the pace that it needs to go at. And so again, whatever needs to be, whatever is ready to be looked at and processed will be. And it's not something you have to worry about, like draining you or taking something from you, right? Like it's actually going to be giving you things. It's going to be giving you life. It's going to be giving you energy. It's going to be giving you freedom. So yes, sometimes this work can involve intense, emotions or experiences, but it's always done in a titrated way, meaning little by little by little, so that your system isn't overwhelmed. Because I know you already have a lot on your plate. We're living in modern times. Our phones are buzzing all the time. People are asking us something. We got kids, we got, work responsibilities. It's a lot for our system to juggle. So this is why, like, when doing this work, though, what's really beautiful, though, is you start to feel like more space in your day. Your mind starts to get clearer, and you start to experience the freedom that you've been looking for, maybe for a really long time, and haven't even been able to put it fully into words. So I would start with just looking at some of these questions, seeing if anything resonated today that I spoke about, or maybe that Kat spoke about. And maybe you're getting a sense or a feeling in your body, even as you were listening to this, that there's something here that wants to be maybe listened to or tuned with or explored. And I would just invite you to, yeah, reach out to one of us, or maybe or someone else, to just begin to explore this journey of going a bit deeper into restoring and healing your nervous system.
Well, I think what you really just did for all of us is give us permission.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us don't feel that we have the permission to feel the way that we want to feel because dad sacrificed a lot, or at least he
Yeah.
was physically there, or I know he loves me. And it's kind of that like loyalty piece that we go through. We talk about that a lot in FCT, the loyalty we have to our family members. We are willing to give up parts of ourselves, including our emotions and our feelings, at the expense of keeping us in connection with people in our family. And that comes from a loyalty. And it also comes from, as you said earlier, this seeking for connection, this seeking for love. And so I just love that you kind of gave everyone permission. I hope just like I did, I hope everyone's like, their shoulders relax, they take a deep breath. And I
Yeah.
guess too, like what comes up for me as you're saying that is like really what the emotion that I'm still navigating in terms of both mother and father wound is grief. And
Yeah.
I never understood what grief was and what it felt like And then my brother-in-law passed unexpectedly this past
Mm.
summer in August, and it was extremely difficult. And it was me facing grief head on in a very new way. And then it sort of kind of trickled into those same feelings and emotions were coming up when I would hang out with my family. And I'm like, whoa, why is this all of the sudden feeling so similar to this one completely different experience that I had? It's like, well, this is just grief, and this is you trying to reconcile with the parts of you that you had to give away. Um, which then brings up this thing of like, how do we incorporate forgiveness and understanding into healing the father wound? Like for ourselves, for others, what what does that give us besides freedom?
Stability. I'll kind of touch on that a little bit more, but and first of all, Kat, I just want to take a moment to just acknowledge what you just shared. Grief is a big piece of this work. And like you said, it's layered. And sometimes I have people that come to do this work after maybe something else has happened in their life. Maybe they lost a job. Maybe they went through a big transition, like a move to a new state or a new place, and or they lost a loved one. All of that is change. And it's even positive change, like getting married or, getting a promotion or whatever. Like even that, there's a level of grief, even sometimes in the positive experiences in our life. And I just want to speak to it, yeah, just how you just shared, like how that I'm really sorry to hear about the loss of that family member last year, and just I just can imagine, like, yeah, like the layers that maybe got unearthed in that process as your system was making sense of a sudden loss like that, and then other pieces that went along with that, like as it was processing with your family and some of the other dynamics that were playing out within your family. The grief is a big, big piece of this work. And we hear a lot about forgiveness, particularly in the self development world. And how, yes, it brings us, it's not about the other person, it's about us, and, liberating ourselves. And I want to say, I guess with my clients, I never try to rush the forgiveness piece. It is a process. And again, depending on the layers that are there. I find that when our system is able to have more regulation, meaning we can experience like different emotions and we don't necessarily judge ourselves for those emotions or feel like we have to get rid of them or control them. So the more capacity we have for sensation in our body for different emotional experiences, grief, sadness, rage, like all the things, right? Like that capacity grows, and our ability to forgive also grows alongside of it, because forgiveness, I see a lot of people that will talk about forgiveness from a mental perspective, like, oh, I forgive my dad, or oh, I forgive my mom. But like there's parts of their like tender inner children that still haven't been met yet. So they're not there yet. Like the adult rational mind is there, but these little children, these little parts of us that weren't met, there was no resolution to, haven't forgiven, or are still living kind of stuck in that place in their system. So I find that forgiveness comes a lot more naturally when we're able to meet those tender parts of ourselves, and we continue to meet them in ways where, again, they really feel like there's safety and stability. And I feel like that it becomes a lot less effortless. So again, it's not something we always have to consciously be trying to control or effort ourselves into forgiveness. It's something that naturally starts to happen as our systems get more regulation and capacity.
Yeah, I hold the same value. I never ask somebody to forgive a family member when they're not ready. I
Yeah.
actually don't even have to bring up forgiveness a lot of
Yeah,
times. Most of the time,
exactly.
people will come to me and say, I think I'm ready to forgive my brother, or I think I'm
Yeah.
ready to forgive my dad. And I'm like, great.
Yeah.
You're unlocking some freedom for yourself. And I love the stability aspect too. That's a really big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I want to pause here because I know we could just keep diving into so much around the father wound, but I think that we've really given the community today a wonderful dive into you and your work and the father wound itself. I can't thank you enough for your vulnerability and for your wisdom and your expertise. And I would love to leave the listeners with a way that they can connect with you and learn more about your work, even if you have any workshops coming up or any free offerings you can provide that would just help them on their journey.
Yeah, so you can find me on social media. My Instagram is Laura Lisa Larios, and I share a lot of content over there that you can check out around the father wound. You can also, in my bio on my Instagram, you'll find different other podcast interviews that I've done where I've talked about the nervous system and or the father wound. So there's some things there. And yeah, if you're ever feeling called to go a little bit deeper into this work, I also do work one-on-one with clients. And there's also a link in my bio to apply for a spot for one of those sessions. And lastly, my business partner and I recently launched recently in the last year or so, we launched a nervous system certification program. So it's ICF accredited. We got our accreditation last year. And so if you're really also just feeling called, a lot of the students that join our certification, they've experienced some kind of personal transformation within their system. And then now they're really feeling the call to bring more of this work to others and to the world. And so it doesn't always have to be in the context of maybe like the work that Kat and I do, like this one-to-one really deep work. Maybe for you, it's like you want to take the certification because you're a mom and you just really want to be able to, again, regulate your own system and like break some of those generational patterns. That's one thing you can learn inside the program and deeply embody. For others, that they work in corporate and they want to learn how to take this work into the corporate space, so they can help like with team regulation and resilience building and emotional intelligence, and that's all built from the nervous system. So again, there's multiple ways that people have used this work, so it doesn't always have to be in terms of like coaching. But if you're ever interested in learning more about that program too, we launch that twice a year, and there's an application where you can learn more about that as well on my social media.
Oh, amazing. And I just have to say, thank you for the work you're doing. I just can't thank you enough for doing this work and helping heal our world. It's so phenomenal.
Thank you so much, Kat. Same to you.
Thank you.
We feel called, right? We were called. It's interesting how that happens. Yeah.
Our families are always in service to us. Always.
Yes.
Always.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining this week's episode. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review the podcast. And we will see you next week on the Heal with Kat podcast. Thanks.